Hey everyone, in this video, I want to break down the impact that chronic dieting, frequent dieting, bad dieting, yo-yo dieting, whatever you want to call it, has on your body and your brain, and why that has impacted or maybe is currently impacting your long-term progress. So let's go ahead and break it down. Before we dive in, I don't know if you guys know this, but on average, women in their 40s have tried 61 different diets throughout their lives. That's according to research by one poll. And maybe you, like a majority of the women that I talk to, when I'm like, hey, what have you tried? They're usually like, well, the list of what I haven't tried is probably shorter. So maybe you find yourself there. And that can feel, I don't know, maybe discouraging, maybe upsetting, maybe like, oh, I wish I haven't succumbed to those pieces. But I think the really frustrating point is how early it happens. The average age among women in the US start dieting kind of varies here and there. There's a lot of different factors that go on. But many of them look at just like early adolescence. And I think all of us can probably like reflect pretty quickly on when that happened for us. But some research from the National Eating Disorders Association has indicated that sometimes by age 8, about half of the girls in the US have already started dieting. And so what's super important to me as I kind of walk into like my purpose of being able to break down this information and really teach women a different way of doing things is that it starts really early. And a lot of us maybe didn't have the tools, but by being able to understand how to break away from chronic dieting now, maybe we can start to shift that narrative for other women and girls that are in our lives. So dieting to me kind of feels like this crazy, like yo-yo cycle. It seems like no matter what diet it is, like whether it's keto or Whole30 or paleo or cutting out carbs or just limiting dessert or Atkins or whatever it is, name any of the crazy things that you have done. It all starts with initial excitement. Like a fad, we do it because it promises maybe quick and dramatic weight loss. Maybe it's something that we really need. Maybe it's something we really need for our health, or there's something coming up. And there's usually something catchy, like super simple solutions. And I know I talk about things being super simple, so I get it. We can have enthusiasm, hype, hope, like we feel really, really good. And we're required to follow strict rules and regulations. Maybe that's regarding what to eat or when to eat with fasting. Maybe we're eliminating food groups. These are the good foods. These are the bad foods. These are the approved foods. This is the meal plan. Maybe it's just severe calorie restriction, going down like crazy Octavia, going down to like 800 calories, which is below the RDA minimum overall. But that's another conversation. And, you know, sometimes that can feel good. Again, I have a rigid part of my personality. Maybe you have a rigid part of yours. And so it can feel like we have some clear direction, maybe, that it doesn't feel rigid and strict right away. It feels like, oh, maybe this is a clear path. Okay. We're required to kind of follow these things. And with that severe calorie restriction, because they got us to follow rules, whether it was eliminating carbs or eliminating fats or eliminating what we were eating or when we were eating or how frequently we're eating or the containers that we ate them in, whatever change in our food intake or exercise or movement that went on, you might experience some rapid change. You might start to see progress, and that can reinforce your belief like, oh my gosh, it's working. This is exciting. It's effective. Maybe this is the thing. Okay. We don't just keep taking action because it's not working. Like there's usually some initial progress, but then we hit the wall. There's a plateau. Maybe there's a plateau in your loss, in your progress. Maybe it slows down. Maybe it stops. Or maybe there's a setback. Like maybe there's something that happens in your life or with stress, or that like we can't follow these rules and the rigid regulations all the time. And so maybe the setback comes from ourselves. And that can be frustrating. That can be demotivating. That can be part of the narrative that goes on that we're never going to make this change. And so that restrictive nature usually leads to boredom with our food choices, or boredom with the workouts, or maybe we're feeling socially isolated. We've said no enough times, or maybe it worked in this like really kind of special time frame in our life where we didn't have maybe any of those things going on. Maybe we were traveling, it was like a little more chill or calm, so that we didn't have to kind of participate in those things. But now it's becoming unsustainable because you want to participate in regular meals. You want to eat with your family. You want to go out with the girls. You want to go to events. You want to be able to travel. You want to do those things. And so it starts to take an emotional toll. Like the failed attempts, they add up. You know, after the first one, it's not like, oh, okay, yeah, I really need to do something different. But after the cycle goes over and over and over again of like, yay, I'm excited. I see some progress. This is amazing. I hit a setback. Now I can't do anything that I want to do. Then we start to feel like we failed. We feel guilty. We feel frustrated. Our self-esteem is impacted. Our well-being is impacted. We feel like we're never going to get there. So why the hell try? And so then we have this relapse. We can't sustain it anyways. And so it's this like self-sabotaging piece that happens, and the exact specifics are different for everybody. But we know we can't do it long term. So we just revert back to our old pattern, our old self. Sometimes it's a hard slip. Sometimes it's a slow creep. And that can lead to regaining the weight. And that can lead to regaining even more of it than before you started because of that adaptation. And that can be even more frustrating. And then we feel like the starting line is even further away. So we go down a research rabbit hole. We're like, oh my gosh, okay, now I really, really need to make change. It feels even more like this is something that I need. And so we go down the rabbit hole. We're looking for something different. Maybe it's hormones, maybe it's my age, maybe it's my body type, maybe it's, there's all these different things. So if you look into the forums, the studies, the podcasts, you try to find these really nuanced solutions, these approaches. Like maybe I just like wasn't specific enough to understand why your body feels broken. Or at least that was my reality after going through this cycle so many times. Really what I came down to is like, I have to be broken. It has to be me. There has to be something that's going on. But the cycle repeats over and over and over again. Despite those negative outcomes, the search for the quick fix can feel like, even though we know in our heads, like, what are we doing? It can perpetuate that cycle. But it's not just kind of the emotional piece. It's that set point piece of like understanding that we're not going to get there long term if we don't get off that cycle. If we are still just in the point of going after the next thing, we don't give ourselves time to get to that new set point. And then our metabolism starts to adapt. And so chronic dieting isn't only going to impact our mental health and our self-esteem and our confidence and our frustration levels and just like this mental overwhelm that you're probably just don't need any more added to for your life, but it's actually going to decrease your total daily energy expenditure. And so if we look at what our metabolism is, what our metabolic rate is made up of, when I'm talking about metabolism, I'm talking about our TDEE. It's made up of a few different things. The biggest thing contributing to that is our basal metabolic rate. You may have heard of it as your resting metabolic rate. This is usually what's calculated if you've gone into like a bod pod or an in-body scan, kind of basically looking at the energy that your body would need if like you just laid in bed all day just to keep the lights on. So we have that aspect of our metabolic rate. And a lot of that is determined by our age, our sex, looking at the amount of muscle mass that we have, things like that. Then we have our non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This is basically all the energy that our body expends if we're not sleeping, eating, or moving, like exercising. So it's basically non-exercise activity. Like there's so many different things. And there's so many pieces here that can start to adapt, like our rate of speech, fidgeting, like just kind of these natural body movements overall. We have our thermic effect of food. We have to utilize energy to digest, absorb, metabolize foods that we eat. That takes energy. And then the tip of the pyramid for our metabolic rate is exercise. A lot of times people like really overhype these two pieces, exercise and your resting metabolic rate. And we try to like obsess over our wearables and calculate all these things and feel like we're going to have this magic pill. But when we've chronically dieted and we've gone through that cycle over and over and over and over again, our basal metabolic rate is going to decrease because it's basically like, whoa, I'm trying to expend as little energy as possible. Like, you're not giving me much, so I'm going to try to turn off the lights and basically conserve energy wherever I can because I've had this chronic kind of decrease in food. Now, I'm talking about chronic. I'm not just saying like eating below your metabolic rate at all. Like, we have to be in a calorie deficit if we're going to see any weight loss or fat loss. But that's going to be dieting for longer than 4 months for a really aggressive depth of a deficit. If this is happening cyclically over and over again. So our basal metabolic rate takes a big hit. Then our non-exercise activity thermogenesis is also going to decrease. And a lot of times that's unintentional, that our rate of speech, our desire and motivation to want to move are kind of like fidgeting, involuntary movements. But studies have shown that the adaptation that we can see from chronic dieting is upwards of 600 calories. And so this is where like you could feel like you are eating the same amount or you haven't changed anything and your body is not responding, or it's starting to go the other way because that total daily energy expenditure has started to slow down. So now the same intake you were at, whether you're actually monitoring that intake or not, those same habits that you have, now you're in a point of overconsumption. So chronic dieting is going to make it harder to be able to kind of get out of that hole. And every attempt, like the longer we've been doing this, that adaptation gets worse and worse and worse. And so the depth, the duration, the frequency, all of those matter. So like the depth of what we're doing, whatever kind of that dieting cycle is. And I know I called Optavia out by name, but really just anything that's like severe calorie restriction. This is why a lot of people pull 1,200 calories just like out of nowhere if I'm going to see anything. But if that depth is super, super low, like aggressive from being lower than our total daily energy expenditure, then we're going to start to see a more increased or an increased likelihood of our body hitting that adaptation. If this kind of dieting phase has a long duration, if we've been eating below our total daily energy expenditure, I say hello to all my people who are just chronic undereaters. If you've been doing this for a long, long time, our energy demands decrease. And then women, as we age, we naturally are losing muscle mass at a faster rate. Muscle mass is metabolically expensive. It takes a lot of energy. So then we don't need to be using as much energy. So the duration matters. And then if it's this frequent, whether that depth, the duration, those other kind of pieces, if this is the cycle that we've been on over and over and over and over again, our body is kind of like, wah, what do you want from me? I don't know how to listen to you. So it's going to start to kind of send us some crazy haywire signals overall. So what happens when we're in this chronic dieting phase is, maybe we're in this like pre-dieting phase where our total daily energy expenditure, like our body needed around 2,200 calories. We're slightly over consuming just a little bit here or there. So then maybe, we start to feel like, ugh, like now my clothes are a little bit tighter. Maybe I don't have enough energy. Maybe my composition is changing a little bit. And so we go through this dieting phase. Our total daily energy expenditure is still there, but we're eating below it. So, maybe we're eating in an appropriate deficit. We're starting to see 1.5 pounds or so come off a week. But if we've been doing that for a long time, and this could be whether you're counting calories, or this could be you eliminated desserts, or you went on keto, or you went vegan, or whatever it is, whatever you're doing, you're shifting your intake overall. Then after a time, we start to see this plateau. And so this is where, again, we could be consuming that same amount, but that total daily energy expenditure has started to adapt to that lowered intake. And then we're like, oh, screw this. It's not working. I'm frustrated. I'm putting in a lot of energy and effort and I'm not seeing anything anyways. And I can't do any of the things that I want, everything that starts to happen. And so then we're like, screw it. I'm throwing in the towel. I'm going to go do what I was doing before. So we go back to eating where we were before, but now our total daily energy expenditure has lowered. And so we're going to start to see more of a rapid weight regain as we start to come out of that. That's why a lot of times it's like, oh, it took me like forever to feel like I lost the weight and then it immediately came back on. That can be why that's happening. So there's a lot of things that are shifting as we're becoming metabolically adapted. Leptin is going to decrease. That's basically our satiety hormone. When it's like, hey, I'm full, that signal is going to start to increase because our body's like, no, I don't want to tell you you're full because I need more. So from a habitual and mindful eating standpoint, it gets a lot harder to stick to those pieces because we're getting this hormonal response that is not giving us that fullness signal. Our testosterone is going to start to decrease, and low T, especially in females, can give us a whole host of other problems. And if we just look at how hormones function in general, one piece is not just going to like live on an island by itself. Our body is this like beautiful complex organism that everything interacts. T3 and T4, that's when we're looking at thyroid function. Those start to go down. So our body is not responding well. We're not thriving when we're in this state. And then ghrelin, which is our hunger hormone, is like, hey, we're going to go ahead and ramp up. And so it makes it a lot harder for us to be in that under eating phase, even if it feels like we're maybe not consuming a lot. There's a lot of shifts that, again, are kind of more from a physiological standpoint that our body is trying to be like, hi, we cannot do this any longer. So there's physiological impacts, but there's also behavioral impacts. And so we can't look at anything from just kind of like a one-sided view of how dieting is impacting our long-term success. It's not just like our body is giving us one signal, but that's also going to impact how we're behaving. So when we start to kind of elicit those different pieces, those feelings, we've gone through this a lot, then we can develop these irregular eating habits. We can be super, super restrictive, and then we could go into a point of overconsumption or binging. That could be kind of weekday to weekend. That could be for certain time frames. It could just be here or there. We can have a difficulty in maintaining a balanced and consistent eating pattern. So then our hunger cues don't really know what's happening. It's all kind of like happening very randomly. So it's really hard to allow our body to trust and feel its best, have high levels of energy, have those hunger signals that are really trustworthy. And so we can't really recognize our natural hunger and fullness signals. And so then we're really just like going in blind and we're trying to trust like really misaligned cues. And that's something that was one of the most difficult pieces for me in my early to late 20s. Kind of rebuilding my metabolic rate was rebuilding those cues. My cues had gone so dormant. Like I just felt like I didn't even have them. So I didn't even know what to do. So hunger was attached to so many other things like boredom, self-worth, stress, stuff like that. And when that's happening long-term, when we're having this flip-flop and we're not balancing those things, then we can start to look into having nutrient deficiencies. We're not getting what we need. We don't have the essential nutrients and vitamins and minerals from the foods that are going to allow us to then feel our best, which is going to impact how we think and how we behave. So then we have this loss of motivation. We don't want to engage in exercise. Our libido goes out the window. Maybe we start to associate those things with punishment or obligation, or it just feels like we're pulling teeth. Like, again, everyone's story is a little bit different, but it's not just the body that is adapting. It's starting to impact how we're behaving, and that's going to start to impact us internally. When we've been on this roller coaster then we're so much more likely to struggle with negative body image, low self-esteem, higher levels of emotional distress, having obsessive thoughts, whether that's about yourself or food or your appearance or what you're going to do, all or nothing thinking patterns, feeling like you need to be really restrictive or in control. There's a lot of guilt and shame that can be associated here. Some of us tend to want to just like completely isolate ourselves. Maybe that is from not knowing how to engage in social activity, or sometimes it comes from this like body image side. Like, I don't even want to show up that way. And then we just get like tired and over it. Like, we don't want to do these things anymore and we get fatigued. It's exhausting. And so we have to start to understand the impacts holistically. And that's really what Janine had to do. She just turned 50 this year. And I would probably say at this point, she's like, I had been dieting for probably 30 years more than that, for sure. And a lot of the coaches that she had worked with before, or like she'd had personal trainers, she had worked with friends on nutrition. She'd done like kind of lower level coaching programs. And they were always like, if she couldn't stick to it, it was a her problem. Like, they didn't understand, oh, I'm asking you to eat 800 calories and like try to do all these crazy workouts that you're not capable of doing. Like, they don't even match you. She also had like, she'd been on thyroid meds since she was, I think, 18 or 21. She actually just got off those this year for the first time ever, just with diet and exercise with us. She was able to manage that after getting to a healthy weight, strength training, starting to maintain her muscle mass there. But it wasn't until she understood how to build her body back up. It wasn't just like, okay, let's hammer a different way of going into a diet long term. We had to go through the cycle with her of understanding what her total daily energy expenditure was, being able to do that in a way where like she was working night shifts. She has 2 teenagers that have mental health not concerns, but like there's certain days that are really, really challenging. There's certain times sleep is really, really disrupted for her. So we needed to start to understand a sustainability factor, that it wasn't like my way or the highway. That's how she got off the yo-yo train, was like, oh, I don't need to be perfect. I can hit these kind of random little lifestyle setbacks and that's not going to knock me off, but that's how I can keep moving forward. And so that was how she was able to maintain it. And so instead of just looking like, okay, I get it, Haley, I can't like be on a diet or in a deficit or under eating forever, but like, what should I be doing? Let's talk about that. So I've talked about the depth, the duration, and the frequency. And again, being in a calorie deficit itself is not a bad thing when you know what the depth is. If you want to lose fat, lose weight, or shift your body composition to a leaner composition, we have to be in a calorie deficit. But being an appropriate calorie deficit matters, so that A, your biofeedback isn't tanked, and B, you don't like loathe the process and not want to stick with it. We have to understand what our body's top line is to be able to understand an appropriate calorie deficit. And for most women, that's going to be around 500 to 750 calories below. 500 calories below your total daily energy expenditure is going to elicit a 1 pound loss every week. 1.5 pounds is going to come from that 750 calorie deficit. When we try to go much more aggressive than that, a 2 pound loss at 1,000 calorie deficit, sometimes for most women, that's just too aggressive. Like, we have to eat next to nothing. For some of us, that's not everyone's reality, but we have to understand the depth first. So that's the main thing. Like, it's not that we can't start to elicit change, it's understanding where that depth is coming from. Then the duration here, we can't stay in that place for longer than 3 to 4 months. And also, like, while we're doing that, let's like not blindly eliminate things. Okay. Like, fruit is not the thing that's killing you. Okay. So let's just get rid of those mindsets, learn how to do that in a more sustainable way. But then after around 3 to 4 months, our body gives us signs and signals. You're not a robot. It could happen at different points in time. That basically is like, hey, I'm like waving my white flag. I'm done with fat loss. And then we're going to start to increase our intake consistently over time. and go through what we would call a reverse diet. So as you're doing those things, though, like I said, we have to incorporate foods you enjoy, foods that make you feel your best. We have to adopt that to schedule disruptions and limiting the all or nothing mindset. Like, we need to be going out to eat. If you're an ice cream girly, like I'm an ice cream girly, we need to start to understand what that looks like. We can't be in a place of avoidance all the time. But then after we're at that appropriate duration, we're going to start to increase intake until we're back at our total daily energy expenditure, going through that reverse diet appropriately. So just a friendly reminder that nutrition and fitness is a journey, but it shouldn't be a journey of frustration. It should really be a journey of empowerment and celebration of your body and what it's truly capable of. Our nutrition and movement should enrich our lives. It should fulfill our lives. It should bring you joy and vitality. It shouldn't take anything away. It shouldn't be a negative process. Really embracing health and being the healthiest version of ourselves is about nurturing ourselves and enjoying the process and finding balance and being here for a long time. So I just want you to remember that focusing on your nutrition and training is not in and of itself restrictive or negative or something that should bring about feelings of guilt and shame. It should actually be something that is so empowering and uplifting and like, wow, I am giving my body what it deserves, what it needs. And that feels really good. So if you are kind of struggling with what that could look like, or maybe you have been at a point where you've been chronically dieting, it's been this cycle that you just like don't know how to get off of, what are the places I should be at? I don't know. There's some lingering questions I have. Just go ahead and book a quick 15-minute call. We can talk about your history. We can talk about how it's impacted your metabolic rate. We can talk about consistency, like, is it a behavioral side of things? Like, what's actually been happening with the struggles? Why can't we maintain that new set point? And like, let's just do it. Let's break it all down. So go ahead and schedule a call below if that sounds like something that you want to do.